Boom, what's up everyone? Welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakian. Very excited to be talking about rethinking scientific discovery. We have Parnian Barekatain joining us on the show. Hello.
Hello everyone, I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Super excited. For those that don't know, Parni's background is she's an independent researcher focused on the physics of intelligence. And you can find the links in the bio below, shannonlabs.co, as well as her Twitter profile. All right, Parni, let's start things off with one of our favorite questions to ask our guests. What are your thoughts on the direction of our world?
Oh boy. So the direction of world, my main interest is like two main aspects. One is how we are shaping science or innovation in like a broader perspective that we're thinking about, which we're going to talk about. And the other one is like physics of intelligence that I'm also very excited about, because I think the way we're bounding ourselves has come from the idea of like the direction that like even people that can have more new innovative ideas and discoveries that they usually don't think about, and that's something I'm very, very excited about like innovations and new ideas.
So when you were young, like who were you that got you interested in rethinking the science and innovations?
Yeah, I actually was like really interested in physics and like teleportation when I was younger. So that was like my main childhood dream. And I supposed to study physics. I accepted physics to study in Moscow State University in Russia before I finished my high school, but my parents didn't let me to go. So I had like a long journey until I ended up in the US. I ended up not studying physics. I dropped off 4 times from undergrad, and I did like a bunch of different random things. And then one thing, it was kind of like that's more of like a recent, because after I was visited Iran when I was here for a year, I was seeing all the very interesting like innovations and techs that are happening like in MIT and like Harvard and like other universities, but they're like those are very, very segregated from like some like people that are like super excited. They want to like know like how they can do science and like research and how they can access to like informations. And yes, you have all the old web page of university professors that you kind of look at too, and like Wikipedia pages, but that's something, for example, when you are like having a problem, you don't know what is all the most like relevant resources that I have, and that makes me excited to start my first company, which I was like working on. But generally, I really think about like science and scientific discovery or innovation, a broader perspective, but we have the whole innovations, like it shouldn't be bounded only in university and university labs and with like a very well structured mechanism. And that's something I do like to change as one of my life goals. I have lots of life goals, but that's one of them.
And then how do we do exactly that? How do we unbound the scientific discoveries and advancements out of just the academic?
Yeah, so like if you look at the problem in science, you can break it down in many different pieces. Like one of the pieces is about scientific journal. Like right now, for example, we should have some sort of experiment. Like, I mean, each field, they have their own disciplines. And then you kind of like use like certain experiments. Your journals is like have some certain like timeline for the experiment that you design, and you're proofing something. But, and then in some sense, like many of those incremental, some of them, it depends on the field, is more fundamental. But you can think about this in terms of the journal. Like you can do like lots of innovation in journal. For example, I can just like constantly updating my innovations over and my ideas over. It can be much more crowdsourced, like people like come together and like bouncing off like ideas. And the other things like it's bothers me the most is that the language of like each field is very, very specific. So if I'm like, for example, I start reading a lot about neuroscience, and when I'm reading that, like there's like lots of like vocabularies I don't know, but the core idea is a lot simple. And then you see like the whole sets of books and like pseudoscience books, which is like crazy, like interesting sci-fi books, but they're not really connected with science, but there are like very interesting ideas, and how I can concretize those ideas into actual science. And I guess that's something a link is missing, or how can I borrow ideas ideas from like many different disciplines, but I'm like formulating like ideas for doing like discovery. That's something you can like work on like scientific journal, and there's like a whole branch of things like in the incentive structure. So like lots of like scientists are thinking about like who's going to be the first author. And one thing I really care or like interested by few scientists, and like one of them is like Satoshi, I guess. Like he was like a anonymous, independent person that like, I didn't say like he did like a breakthrough discovery, but he did the structure that changed the whole like market like significantly. And
anonymously,
and that was like something I think a link that we're missing a lot in the science.
Selfless breakthroughs.
Exactly, and like how you can kind of working on like directions that are not a research that is not based on any like academic fame or based on any sorts of like accreditations. And like if the goal is like is discovery, then it should be, and like it should not comes from our like level of things that when we do like science, especially like in AI, like everyone when they do like they say, oh, we are the best organizations or we are the best people doing AI because of X, B, C, D, but there is like lots of like manipulations over like how is that controlling those like science and like discoveries and who's getting credit for, and you see like all those like arm race between those like systems. And what I'm interested in, like Tim Berners-Lee, it's not anonymous, but like is like someone that did like a huge impact, but he like think a lot less in terms of like what is the like who's going to control like internet, which that was like a discovery that we had. It was like significantly changed. I think that should happen a lot in more different fields.
Agreed. Yes.
That be lacking. And then you have the sets of like academic institutions. I'm not against academic institutions. I think they provide like lots of tremendous values that exist. Like you are in the intellectual like simulation essentially, that you can talk with like lots of people, and the goal of those people to mentor you and like lots of professors. But there are different systems here that you can questions about, like why if I want to do science, why the PhD program should be 3 to 4 years, why I cannot come very unconventional background, why it should be age. I might come up with like very crazy idea when I'm like 65 and or like 12 and I want to do science. And yes, you potentially can like talk with like research, but the structure is like not very well designed when you trying to do like innovation, or when you trying to like, or if you want to work on many different fields, like you need to provide your own credit in order to be able to speak your ideas or directions that you want. And there's a whole process of like matching with the person I'm like much more aligned. Like one of the main problem, I like to do science, and I have a hard time to find out exactly the professors that really understand me, and I can like speak with them like hours and hours, like talking about like ideas which might shape like the way like we do things. And I think that like connections is like something missing with like science. And there's a whole set of ideas also you can see like in terms of like grant and funding, and how much of like those effect on the relationship and advising between like students and professors. And like some of the times like students don't have independent, and they are like really like bounded to particular like grant money that exists, that the project they had to work, or like the professors can provide them. And some is unfortunate by like some of the universities that they are not able to get like lots of like grant funding because it's based on accreditations. Then you less look at the ideas, you are like less look at like the innovation that comes through. They kind of like go to like a negative like feedback loop, and then the science a lot become like more only segmented in like a particular like areas, and like very few like people that are like extremely like famous, or they are like really good at communicating like their ideas. And that's something a mismatch, because like lots of those ideas that we see like in the papers, they're not very well articulated, or they weren't like in the labs, or professors that weren't very famous. And I think that's something I'm thinking. I spent like lots of time like Satoshi. He was like I don't know like how that structure can be like replicatable, or like there might be some ethical there might be some ethical considerations, like I don't know exactly, but he published like about Bitcoin like in like a random like blog post, right? Like random mailing list, and without any like journals or like things, and that was very, I guess, like it was like very interesting to me.
Built a core community of people that could keep going with the breakthrough.
Yeah.
And he could remain anonymous, or she, or whatever it is. So I want to visualize this together with you. So in a sense, civilization has its edge of knowledge that we've been pushing over and over again in different fields over time. And the current way that we push the edge of the different fields, there's incentive structures that get people to push at the edge. And there's also there's all these different variables that go into how people decide to push at the edge. And so how do we make it most effective for people to push at the edge of different fields, have transfer learning, we have lexicons within fields that can easily transfer ideas across fields. All these different things come together for a more cohesive scientific discovery process.
So I think there are like few processes involved in that setting. One is like a scientific tools that we can work on and make it much like better in order to build sets of system that make those communications or relationship between different fields or ideas like much more interesting. Like for example, I mentioned to you that we can create something like GitHub that people can push their ideas like constantly, or you can like simplify, like you can probably make like a website like doing simplified versions of your like using like language models that we already have and like give you like a simplified versions of like an idea. But those are like a sets of scientific tools you potentially can like work on, like or distill, for example, they have like for like creating like a better visualizations of like science that you like talk about. But also the other things I'm interested in, like lots of people, like for example, I really like Kevin Alsovit, like he was like MIT Media Lab, and he posted his research like that he's like interested to work on like publicly, and I feel like a lots of like professors, they should post their research and the main question that we should ask, or important questions like publicly, and like lots of people, they're expert, like they get older, they kind of like understand that like fragmented vision more cohesive, and I think those people need to ask like more fundamental questions in the science community, and those questions should be published a lot more and be more requested in terms of like we are working on those like directions. And yeah, because I think like right now when you're the process of mentor, you're just like doing a lot very incremental changes, especially in like some fields, and that's like one part. I think like what like sets of tool you make, but making the informations that are most important and much we have like higher weights. So you maybe can have like a weighting mechanism for figuring out what types of questions or like things I can like answer, and how does relationship between those ideas come to. And then I think the other things also would be interesting is like coordination problems of between different types of like researchers that we see, how they're allocating their resources for like sets of ideas. And like right now is like whatever I can market my ideas or I think I can solve it is like become like it's like a very periodic like science. Like lots of people, like for example you see Converge here in like AI, and like you go to like Boston, like everyone converge kind of like in like biotech. It's like you kind of see those scientific hub and so converging like some directions because there's like a lot more funding and there's like lots of resources available there. And I think I'm not too sure what's the answer, but the question is like how we can kind of break down those like symmetrical like locations and like more fundamentally questions like, oh, what are the fields that might be, or questions that we can ask. Like there are like lots of professors like in university thinking about things like 30 years or 40 years or like 100 years from now, or like maybe less, like on different fields. But like tend to like we see those science hub converging towards like the same directions, that like your science like creating like particle flavors episodically through like a time period that we see, and the question how we can restructure that potentially.
And so another one of the aspects that you've been mentioning along so many of these other key points is that when we do push for scientific discovery, what are the motives? Because this is a really good way to view it, and we're going to end up making a piece of content on this down the line. But the Satoshi method of pushing the edge of the field, because when you deploy updates to the rest of our world and you do it in a way that's anonymous, you don't do it in a way that seeks fame and that seeks fortune, but you do it in a way that seeks to better the world, and you stay out of the vortex where people can critique your personality and who you are as a person rather than the idea. So that in itself is such I think a major key. People want to make breakthroughs in science, but then all of the perverse incentive structures that exist and the way that fame and money affect the process.
Yeah, it's not only fame and money. I also think like you going to filter yourself, like how I view in the scientific community, and because you're not anonymous, I think it's provide like some structure of like, oh, am I considered credential enough? If I'm considered my like view, what like other scientific community think about me. So I don't know what's the best way to deploy this, but I think there is an interesting like gap that we should like fill in terms of promoting a lot of like independent and also anonymous researchers.
Yeah, think about how many young people have incredible ideas that they want to uplift into more of a mainstream edge of science, but they can't because they don't have the credentials, the background, these types of questions. And how to rethink the structures to make it easier for someone that's in their later part of their life or the earlier part of their life to get involved in pushing the edge of science. So you spent a decent amount of time also with self-teaching as well. So teach us about how you ended up self-teaching yourself. I think a lot of people are really interested in this, like this whole unschooling process. So teach us about that.
Yeah, so I guess very related to that, one idea I want to talk, it's like a scientific community that we're going to like how it's important to structure a lot more of the scientific community. That essentially helps me a lot. I guess when I moved, I kind of like know that I want to like, again, like the question is like, there's a separate question like whether we can scale scientific community or not, but like one of the things I learned the most, like when I moved to the Bay Area, I was working in a startup, but then I involved in like living like lots of community houses, and those community houses, like I was also like I always tell like people I have like a secret master at Stanford because I was going to like lots of classes like at Stanford and going to conferences, like that helps me a lot. I feel like there should be like a school that like you don't pay tuition, you just for like 1 year just go to like conferences. Because like you learn a lot, you learn about like
network with other powerful people,
like the state of like a field and what you learn, and like that those are like affect me a lot, like figuring out, asking more important questions, or like figuring what's the most relevant resources that I need to like use, or like people that like help me along the way. And also
just walk into the classes at Stanford, Berkeley, that type of stuff. MIT, or just walk in, sit down.
Which was like very great because like lots of you actually, like my housemate was like TA in one of the NLP class, and so he was like had his TA at 11 p.m. Okay, nobody goes to his TA and knock his. I was like, can I ask you a question because I took that class?
Yeah, you get direct access.
So I was kind of like lucky that I asking like TAs.
Like so few people get that.
But I think so like lots of people like putting courses online, but also creating like those community for learning. It's very important. I wish it was in all the cities like around the world. Like we kind of see those, like here also there is lots of really cool science community houses. Like I wish like we see a lot more around the world that people come together and like learn together, and even they create their own directions. They can like use like lots of resources like as part of what they're working on. And I think that's something you see a lot in Silicon Valley. There's like lots of like people with weird background that's not common in other places usually, and that's something I like to see a lot more in scientific community. That potentially helps a lot. Also, the other things I did, like at the first research project I have, I met people I work with like very weirdly. Like one of them was one of my friends I met at Burning Man, and we started talking about AI, and we talked for like 8 hours or something like that. And then after we just like, okay, we should like probably work on like writing paper. And I find a mentor that he also like help us. Like it was like very established scientist, and like someone else who was like undergrad in MIT. Like we kind of formed like an independent research like project that we work together, which is like none of us has like a credential by academic standard that we see except the mentor that I find. And that was like really fulfilling experiment that I had, like that you can do it. It's like a lot harder, but it was kind of like possible that you can structure the way to like discover the ideas that you want, and that kind of like made me a lot more interested to like research in AI, and that's something I continue doing that. And I collaborated with OpenAI, and also I was an instructor at Udacity. So those because of just I made like my own like side research project and like find like random people and work with them.
That's what's up.
Yeah.
That's how to funnel yourself into organizations that are doing good work and learn from their processes. And also, I like how you explain that there's totally for young people, finding mentors is so critical. Walking into conferences, volunteering at conferences, networking with people at conferences, also walking into classes, finding these little these pockets of like scientific houses where people are living together, pushing a specific edge in a field. I look forward to society having more of these pockets of like scientific houses and like conference tours for young people to like go around to the different conferences.
There's like lots of people can just like going to classes and sitting in classes and like take lectures, but they don't do it. It was so unfortunate. Like, there are very few people I see like they are coming to class at Stanford, and whenever you ask professors, they're like fine, and you could see them at conferences like, oh, can I sit your class? Like, you're fine.
Sure, especially when you want to. Because they already have students in their class that pay and don't even want to be there to And
then you can also like do the side project in the class, because the main important part is also like doing the class assignment. So you can find enough like friends. So that
then you get their email, and you're all of a sudden you're one of their you're one of their star pupils because you actually care about the class.
I mean, for some fields are a lot like harder. I think like for example, you're trying to do like vet biology labs. I think that's why we require to have hubs that are make those sorts of experiments are much more feasible. There is also the other interesting things we should talk about is like the whole aspect of feedback loop in order to do like research. I think one of the things in AI, the feedback loop is short. I mean, there's some downside that we see like lots of very small incremental change, but also because the computing power we had in past recent years make everyone easy to like run the experiment and kind of like deploy like lots of algorithms that we see and kind of like do modify and do engineering over, because that feedback loop is like very, very short, and you can just like run your algorithms and like test it. But some field, A, we don't have really good benchmark, and B, the feedback loop is really, really long. Like for example, if you want to like do the test on monkeys, like kind of like BCI stuff.
Like longitudinal tests have a long feedback loops.
That's like a long feedback loops.
We just keep pushing. We don't even like the longitudinal test. It's like, that 10-year test, just push the technology into society. Forget the 10-year test.
They're also like, there are so many like
we have no idea how these technological devices are actually affecting our the physiology of our neurology. Like, we don't actually really know yet. We're only starting to understand a little bit.
Yeah, but also like the question, if you want to push the edge, we should kind of think about like laws and regulations, and then bringing down the feedback loop, especially like, for example, if you want to like work with BCI or like hybrid like computing / like intelligence or whatever. So I think for those, like, we really require to have
shorten the feedback loop.
Shorter feedback loop, better benchmark, and different regulations. Also, we need the need for independent, like, anonymous
independent researchers. I totally agree, and actually that kind of leads us to your directing Shannon Labs too.
Although I would say I really think about ethics and ethical consequences, and that's like a whole set of things that it should be thinkable when we like designing the process. And
totally, I think a huge part of it, but also, like you said, just making regulations smoother for scientific discovery, making shorter feedback loops. But at the same time, also recognizing that if we don't run longitudinal tests, we can have more oops moments. So another aspect of rethinking scientific discovery is what you're doing with Shannon Labs. Yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
So about Shannon Labs, like because I mentioned to you, like the first like project I spent it myself was like finding like random researchers and working through that like process, because I study like random major sociology and like leadership, just because of the practical reason, the weird path I went through my life. But then when I started this one, I see how the process is really hard. Like, it wasn't like really scalable, finding the mentor, that finding I was able, like, nobody takes me like seriously when I was like trying to like do science, like, oh, you're not technical, you don't know this one, you don't know this one. So the whole process was like a lot harder, and I wanted to kind of like make a fellowship that provide mentorship and funding and other types of like system where we're thinking or we talk about for people are come from some sort of like unconventional like background, or like they're trying to think about science and they have like, or they're trying to merge different disciplines, or they're trying to work on like a benchmark that like no one really care about, or like shortening a feedback loop, or they want to be anonymous and they want to like work on like sorts of like directions that they don't have like enough support networks that they want to. So the goal is like finding those like a sets of ideas and people and like projects that are not really fit in exactly in the current mechanism or disciplines of like academic institute that we have, and finding them not necessarily like potentially maybe MIT Media Lab is like a really interesting like science hub, but that's like very one specific locations that is like one place, right? And like other places like very like structured, like when you have people all around the world, like how you can kind of creating community and supporting like people, and that's like a goal of like Shannon Labs, be finding those projects and people that are pushing science.
Yep. And you highlighted the word independent researcher. It seems to be another more and more important thing to do, is to not funnel ourselves into necessarily the constraints of academia or the constraints of corporations and industry, but stay independent. How do we fund independent researchers more effectively and let them pursue what they're treating as their input stream? Where are they finding profound realizations and what are they outputting with that? Because it's usually really novel and important for our world.
True, although I think, as I mentioned, academic institutions, they have lots of benefits
totally
too, which, for example, the mentorship that you have, the way you can like structure
you can still get that mentorship independently as well.
It's harder to restructure, and that's one of the goals of Shannon Labs that we have, because like the mentorship that you want to find independent is just a lot harder, and it's like depends on the stage of your career. For example, if you're like already well established, that potential, like NIH, for example, recently opened up the grants for independent researchers, but the one that are postdoc like level, they already like go through like be some sort of like a professorships or whatever, but they want to like work on like some ideas that independently, and they give them like lots of funding to work on those direction, but they're like a lot more competitive in order to get there. And also you should have some sort of credit gradations that we like talk about. Being independent, has some downsides and some like you always like need to worry about funding. You always need to worry about mentorship, and if you can provide those support networks, then my hope is like we popping up a lot with more independent and anonymous potential researchers.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. The funding, the mentorship for independent researchers to deploy more anonymous, selfless updates into our world. Just rethink scientific discovery in general. Let's ask a couple quick questions on the way out that we like to ask our guests. What are your thoughts on what happens before birth and after death?
Before birth and after death. I think it's just about, one thing is super interesting. You can consider what does consciousness come from? And the consciousness come from potentially like evolving some sort of like a complexity in the system that we are going to see. So before birth we are, and also like a souls that we have is kind of like a one like system with some like rules, with kind of like you feeding all the energy from your like mom into like a low complexity like cells, and that start like replicating, and that provide like some consciousness patterns, which that would be very, very interesting. I guess like before Earth, like that conscious patterns wasn't exist in a sense from my perspective, because it's kind of this energy level doesn't follow like particular rules or doesn't have any sorts of like a lower entropy. So we just like see in, I think one thing is in Earth is very interesting, like you always see the intersections of like changing like things to like lower to higher entropy in your system. And before birth we potentially didn't have the lower like entropy or genetics like mutations that we have. And then after that, I think what is important that we are working on something is important, that those ideas stay, because that's kind of part of like a cultural revolutions that you can have, or like the ideas that like culturally evolve and like stays in our timeline. But I don't think we are as a person with like we exist.
Do you think we're alone in the cosmos?
We are alone in the cosmos. As a human species, or as an intelligence creature?
You can take it wherever you want.
As intelligence creature, I don't think so. I think there is like a chance of like having life in the universe is like relatively high. There's like a like equations, like equations that talks about that, and like Adam Frank.
Equation,
and also Adam Frank in his book. You should invite him there. He's also like very interesting, like the life of like civilizations on Earth. He's like talking about the chance of like we have in the civilization. So I think that's like exists. But as a human species, there might be us on Earth that exist. But as an individual person, I think every person is alone in the universe, and they create their own like perspective and ideas about the universe, but we're all like influencing on each other.
And do you think we're in a simulation?
We're in the simulation. I think, we are in a simulation with like some sort of like a shared reality among lots of us that we are evolving, and we should kind of like scope out a lot more, like to have better perspective of like what directions of the simulation that we can imagine that we don't imagine right now, that we live.
The trajectory of where the civilization goes, to envision that and understand the actions we need to take in order to get to the good outcomes. What do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
Most beautiful things, I think I'm very interested in the relationship between entropy and complexity and time. And I think that is like something create life, that is create like many different patterns, that is great intelligence, and that's something I think is very most beautiful, those like relationships. That's
beautiful. I love that too. All right. Parney, this has been super fun. Thank you
Yeah.
for coming on to the show.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Huge
I had
thank
a
you.
great time.
Good. Glad to hear that. Huge thank you to everyone for tuning in and watching. We greatly appreciate. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on the episode. Also, go and talk more to your friends, your coworkers, family, people online on social media about rethinking scientific discovery. Have more conversations about it. Huge shout out to Ron Vargas for producing and directing. Thank you very much, Ronnie. And go and check out the links in the bio to shannonlabs.co, also Parney's Twitter, and check out Simulations links. Help support us, help us grow and prosper, and also support the artists, the entrepreneurs, the organizations in your communities. And go and build the future, everyone. Manifest those dreams into the world. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Peace.